I felt us flying with incredible speed through the white vastness. My gut clenched and my breath caught in my throat. Soon, however, I noticed a tiny speck far away that was growing rapidly. We were approaching it with a pace I didn't know was possible. Soon I recognized the lines and tiers stacked upon one another and tiles and decorations. It was my palace. There was a bright spark. I shielded my eyes, and when I opened them again, I found myself inside my chambers. Nuubat was nowhere in sight, and I rushed down the familiar staircase and opened the heavy entrance doors. I was preparing to see my city and the grandest street of now Kosh-Nuubat leading to the palace, but instead there was only a boundless desert as far as my eye could reach and beyond. Sand drifts obeyed the gentle wind and crawled across the threshold right inside. I took a step over them. With an exclamation, more out of surprise than anything else, I pulled my right foot back into the shade. The clear sky hosted a sun larger than I remembered it. It beat down mercilessly, its scorching heat so intense I wondered how the palace was so cool and pleasant inside. But what astonished me even more were the people. Moaning, gasping, panting, they sat in great numbers in the desert. At first I paid little attention to their faces, casting my stare over their heads to try and see just how many were out there. Then I took a closer look, and some of them were very familiar. I could swear I had seen them before on the streets, and even in the sacrifice procession. They were my people, the citizens of Kosh-Nuubat. They didn't seem to notice my presence. Look at them. A voice invaded my head. Hopeless, powerless, their lot is not to be envied. Those were the city's poor, I soon realized. Brickmakers, seamstresses, farmers, clay diggers, drunkards, loiterers, and outlaws. The sun blazed so bright they were unable to look up. With their eyes on the sand, their 1,000 mouths wailed and sobbed, their voices fusing into what seemed the groan of the dunes themselves. To my utter bewilderment, in the blink of an eye, a heavy downpour descended. It was as cold as the snow high in the mountains. I had never felt such cold before. The icy raindrops lashed the crowd's arching backs, and they writhed and squirmed under their salt. Then the rain was gone as quickly as it fell, and the sun was beating them down again. The rain evaporated from their bodies, hanging as a ghostly haze over the moaning masses. Then it was raining again, chased by the searing heat. And rain again, and heat again. I found the sight hard to look at. Their suffering was almost palpable. Unable to bear it, I turned to the side. Nuubat said she was the patroness of magic. I knew this was a carefully crafted magical illusion, but it felt too real to keep my heart cold. Please, make it stop. I squeezed through my clenched teeth. Have mercy on them. There was no response. Nuubat's voice in my head was no more. The moaning continued, louder and louder, and soon it grew to be as painful for me as the heat and the rain were for the city's poor. Make it stop, please. No reply. Suddenly I realized what I could do. Was this her test? If so, what did she want to see? As I listened to my people suffer, I stood in the pleasant shade of my own palace. I walked out. Even through my sandals the scorching sands burned my feet. I winced but continued to advance. The icy waters descended from the heavens and I shivered. With trickles of water still running down my face, I cupped my hands to my mouth. People, over here. The crowd, struggling under the rays of the merciless sun, raised their weary eyes to me. I heard the wind carry their whispers. It's the Lugal, they said to one another. It's our ruler. How did he get here? Over here, I cried again, the sun frying my back. Come to the palace, quickly, come, shelter yourselves. They were hesitant at first, in disbelief. Guards would usually never permit a person of their ilk to walk close to the wide steps leading to the tiered palace, with its hanging gardens and glazed bricks. But there were no guards, and I couldn't stand to see people suffer so. "Over here! Hide in my palace!" The crowd, now shaking under the assault of the rain, rose up and shambled toward me. With thanks and words of praise and appreciation on their lips, they hurried into the welcoming shade and the comfortable cool of the palace. When the last child and his mother crossed the threshold, the palace was full to the last tiny stretch. There were just enough people to fill each corner and every step of the building. My teeth were chattering, and my shoulders quivering with fever. I was coughing violently, first shuddering from cold, then agonizing under relentless heat. Their violent rage forced me to my knees, but no matter how I bent or covered my head, there was no hiding from the elements. The child who entered last was still staring at me curiously, his thumb in his mouth. Through the anguish and torment, I forced a smile upon my face. Suddenly, the child burst into the whirlwind of colors. In a breath, all was gone. The palace flattened and crumpled into a tiny blot. The rain and the heat disappeared. I saw a flash of Nuubat's ever-shifting muzzle. With a gasp, I realized I was lying on a thick carpet in some house I didn't recognize. All was quiet. My cough had vanished, and so had my fever and the blistering burns on my back. Panting, I pushed myself up. It was a long hall with a high domed ceiling. The entire length of it was occupied by a table bending under the weight of bowls. The stench in the hall was so fierce I staggered and covered my nose. Through tears, I saw a blurry figure in white at the far end of the table. Nuubat's voice, however, boomed as if she were screaming in my ear. "Take a seat. Choose your favorite cut." I regarded the table. It was set for a feast most morbid. Meat filled countless bowls, crowding and stacking up into towers. There was not a single slice that was not completely rotten. Only now did I realize that the hall was humming with a steady drone rising to the dome above, amplifying the noise. The palace was abuzz with flies, crawling, swarming, gnawing at the meat and copulating in it. Their maggots tunneled their way from one bowl to another, weaving palaces of their own in the mountains of meat. What kind of meat it was I couldn't tell, for it was beyond decayed. Some of the cuts were covered entirely by mold. I retched, and bitter bile rose to my throat. "This is perhaps not as delectable as you expect your meal to be," Nuubat noted pensively. "Your test is quite simple. Eat a piece, any one you can reach." "What?" I inquired in a stifled voice, choking on putrid fumes. "What will happen if I can't pass this test?" "Eat a piece of this meat, or I will make all meat that ever crosses its way into your city immediately spoil." "But why? For what offense?" She thought for a moment. "For none. You'll see why. If you can do it. If you will do it." I glanced this way and that, searching for the smallest piece. Soon I found it at the top of a tower of overflowing bowls dripping foul juice. I shot out my hand to grab it. "Remember, Mordu," she interjected, and I stayed my hand momentarily. "You're free to refuse. No one will know it was your choice that made the curse fall upon the city." But I had already made up my mind. I hoped my body could overcome this, and I didn't wish Nuubat to have her way in cursing my city. I resolved to try and swallow the repulsive thing whole in one go. And so I did. With my eyes shut tight and my nose pinched, I stuffed the meat as far into my mouth as I could and attempted one mighty gulp. I failed. The piece was slimy, and its presence in my throat revolting. I struggled again, but my throat tightened in protest, and I sat there at the hellish feast with widened eyes trying to draw breath. I was choking. I retched and the meat was pushed back over my tongue. But at least I could breathe again. Against my will, my jaws locked and my teeth sank into the vile mush. A sour and bitter juice filled my mouth and my tongue began to tingle. Then I felt a rapidly intensifying, nauseating taste that was sickly sweet. My stomach ached with a spasm. Vomit was rising, tears sprang from my eyes. If I spat the meat out now, Nuubat would doubtless consider my test failed. Desperately, I called up all the will I still had and swallowed. This time, my throat let the mush through, and I felt it slide down. My stomach cramped. I was immediately overcome with dizziness. Still pinching my nose, I staggered up and away from the table. The nausea made me drop to my knees. My head was spinning violently, and a rancid aftertaste of blood and metal seized my jaws. I couldn't hold it in anymore. After another great and painful spasm, I emptied my stomach onto the carpet. Then a coughing fit shook me. Fascinating. I realized that Nuubat was now somehow standing over me, watching me shudder unsympathetically. I lifted my head to peer back. You are fragile, Lugu. Toppled by a little weight of flesh left for too long in the sun. But you passed the test, as I thought you would. You will find, however, that this test was different from the first, and the third will be more like the second. With a deafening screech, the feast table finally buckled and cracked. It snapped in the middle, and all the towers of bowls tilted and crashed in a cacophony of breaking pottery and the slimy slaps of meat. I watched this great fall with my jaw slack. There was a whirlwind of white right under the table, and everything in the hall was being sucked into it, slipping through the floor into the abyss. When the table and the feast fully disappeared, the walls themselves began to melt and slide, flushing into the hole. I too sensed an irresistible pull. My scream stretched as though it were physically present, like a cut of cloth, and I wheeled down the vortex as the colors shifted again. I blinked. I sniffed at the air. It smelled of oil, of hot metal, and coals, and of leather. I was standing in the middle of a poorly lit smithy, donning a leather apron, a piece of attire I had never worn before, for I was no craftsman. I had been born into a royal family, and all I had ever known were royal ways. Before me, in front of a smouldering forge, was a wide stone plinth, so wide it was more like a high step. On it, arranged in perfect order of sizes from left to right, lay tools. There were some I couldn't even name, some ancient ones that had since lost their purpose, and some obscure enough to seem utterly foreign. A sensation alarmed me. I could still taste the filth of my own vomit, and my stomach was still gurgling. My throat burned. This time, unlike the trial of the sun and rain, the harm that was done to me stayed with me. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't turn away from the plinth, as though an invisible force nailed me to the ground and held me stiff so I wouldn't turn my torso. I struggled for a while, then finally gave up. Instead, I took account of the tools of bronze and copper before me. There was a needle and thread, an awl, a hammer, a hatchet, an adze. At the far right side, a spade stood leaning against the stone. Nuubat was nowhere in sight. I gathered my breath to ask a question aloud, but the goddess, it seemed, had anticipated it. Man's ambition is far greater than what the universe has bestowed upon him. 2 hands, 2 feet, no more, no less. But that head of yours harbors a deadly disease, imagination. So you dream of great things not meant for you. You devise methods to gain them. But your body can't achieve it, while your mind is much narrower than that of a god who can fulfill their ambitions by the vastness of their thought. You rob your world instead, and out of your spoils you create extensions of what little means you have. An arm is then lengthened by a hammer, and the hammer, unlike your fist, crushes stone and bends metal. Tell me, Mordu, does Kosh-Nuubat have great artisans? Yes, I replied, still unable to turn. Perhaps not the best in the land, but we are proud of our craftsmen. We? Or just you? I pondered. We. My people appreciate them as much as I do. Which of the primitive crafts do they engage in? Kosh-Derdenuk? Ah, now. I heard the sparks of laughter roll in her voice. Kosh-Nuubat is well known for its shipbuilders and for its cloth making. Good, Mordu, good. And what is the most important tool for a shipbuilder? It took me a short while to once again consider the line of tools. Well, I suppose it would be a hammer. I would disagree with you, she said strangely softly. As I told you, the hammer is but an extension. Without a craftsman or a craftswoman to wield it, it's no more than a pointless, unnatural amalgamation of materials. I glowered at the implication. Then it would be the hand that holds the hammer. Now you've finally begun to understand. She seemed content with my answer. After a short pause, something rustled behind me, and I figured it to be her robes. She then continued. There's one more thing. Do you think it's important to know where the hammer lands when you swing it? I narrowed my eyes. She was playing some sort of game with me, but I couldn't yet understand what the goal of it was. Yes, it is. I thought a while. Do you mean to tell me that eyes are also an important tool? Oh, they are. Especially for mortals such as yourself, who have such scarce means of perceiving the world around them. Now pick a tool. They are all in perfect condition. This is the test, isn't it? I wondered. What do I have to pick it for? Simple. I wish to see just how much you value your craftsman. Pick one tool to take out your right eye. Then pick another to cut off your right hand. Fail or refuse, and all craftsmen of your city will lose their hand and eye. My head spun. I felt dizzy, wobbly on my feet. Nausea came back as though I had eaten another piece of rotten meat. For a brief moment I couldn't believe my ears. Just when I thought I was about to slump onto the floor, the same invisible force kept me upright. I was leaning on air as if it were a solid wall, my knees shaking and bending. Remember, came the same sweet whisper. Just say no, and there will be no more tests. No one will know it was your fault. I promise. This time I kept hesitating, my thoughts racing wildly. I didn't know how much time I had spent like this, gasping, beads of sweat rolling down my temples, my heart trembling in my heaving chest. Whenever I tried to grab a tool for my grisly task, my ears began to ring. My vision doubled. I nearly fainted several times, so I continued to falter, torn and conflicted inside, pointing my hand at this tool or another. I exhaled painfully, my voice betraying me. Oh, do you refuse? There were many agonizing thoughts churning in my head, and for a while I did consider refusing this test. My entire being revolted against it. What a preposterous demand! What was I to prove with this act? If I agreed to do it, I would betray my body. If I refused, I would betray my people and allow a mutilation on a scale never before suffered. I paused there, savoring this idea. I wouldn't just turn my craftsmen into cripples. Their entire lives, their hopes and aspirations were trapped inside that hand, those eyes, and their extensions of wood, bronze and copper. I attempted to imagine myself taking the place of a goldsmith, or a mason, or a tailor. If they were truly the adepts of their craft, and they knew I doomed them to such a cruel affliction, they would doubtless ask me to just take their lives. To an artisan, it would be no better than death. Then my thoughts turned another way. Would I have refused the test then, if it were not my craftsman but the city is poor? Yes? Or still no? In a flash, I saw the hopeful and weary faces of the poor in the desert, under the scorching sun and icy rain. No, I couldn't bring myself to inflict such suffering among many when I could pay for theirs with mine alone. After all, I thought, with great fear drowning me, Alugul doesn't need his right hand to give orders. Neither does he need an eye, for servants and viziers are Alugul's eyes and ears. I won't refuse, I finally muttered. My teeth were drumming a horrible beat. My tongue felt swollen and unwieldy. My nostrils widened and narrowed as I struggled to breathe. Nuubat had said this test would be much like the second one. Still wincing from the taste of vomit, I knew I would truly lose what I was about to pierce and cut. I stretched out my quivering, sweaty hand and grabbed an awl. I tried to clear my mind. The less I thought about the ordeal, the better, and the quicker I did it, the sooner it would be over. Nuubat wouldn't let me bleed out. She enjoyed watching me go through her wicked tests too much. Or at least I hoped so. With a great effort of spirit, I steadied my hand. I took a deep breath and held it. Then, in one swift motion, I thrust the awl into my right eye. The pain was so fierce, so primal, that for a moment it deafened me. I knew I screamed, but I couldn't hear it. I only felt the strain of my throat. I believe I doubled over and tossed in agony. There was something pouring out of what was my right eye. Blood, or perhaps tears, or the contents of the eye itself, or a vile mix of all. Slowly my hearing returned. I wailed like a wounded animal. The pain was so intense that for a heartbeat I thought it was not happening to me, as though I was watching some poor wretch writhing on the floor of the smithy instead. Then I perceived footsteps. Nuubat touched me with the tips of her fingers. Right then the sharp pain vanished, transfixed and transformed into a dull ache. Still sprawled on the floor, not supported by any force anymore, I dragged my hand to my face and rubbed it, feeling it with my fingers. I was covered with sticky sweat. Where I expected to feel a bleeding wound, I found an empty eye socket, which had miraculously healed. My sense of depth was gone with my eye. I almost fell face first when I tried to lift my body off the floor. Nuubat helped me up. I was shaking violently, but I had one more thing to do, and the longer I postponed this gruesome trial, the less courage I would be able to muster. It was a horrifying act of malice. My soul protested against what was happening to my body, but I had to do it. I will spare you the details. I chose the hatchet for the second half of my test. When the deed was done, and when I curled into a ball on the floor once again, cradling the bleeding stump, Nuubat touched me. The pouring blood reversed its flow, and Nuubat's sorcery cauterized the grievous injury. Only half conscious, I stared at the thin pale skin that grew over the maimed stump. "I must say I am impressed," Nuubat murmured. "I have tested many, and most of them refused the very first test." I couldn't recognize my voice. Coarse, rasping, tortured. "Does that mean my people are free now?" "Your craftsmen are free to continue their petty pursuits, yes," was her reply. "No mortal mind, however, would ever conjure the magnificent works I have in my collection. I would like to show them to you, Mordu, but whether I will allow you to see them will be decided by the final test." One more time, the whirlwind of space and sorcery carried me away. The first sensation that invaded my head was the smell of salt, joined by an oppressive, chilly breeze carrying sea foam. When the world stopped pulsating, I realized that I was standing under the cliffs, facing the domain of Derdenuk. Behind me was the cliff face, and to my right was the stone sacrificial boat, which had somehow been mended. For a brief moment I enjoyed the serenity of the cliffs of Kosh-Derdenuk. Although I knew they weren't real, and everything around me was conceived by the dark mind of Nuubat, it appeared similar enough to spare me some comfort. I breathed lungfuls of fresh air, and that cleared my head somewhat. I rubbed the stump of my right hand with my left, then touched the hollow socket of my right eye. They were still throbbing with a dull ache. I shivered when another brisk flutter combed my hair. "Look at you, Mordu." I turned, expecting to see Nuubat, but she was circling on my blind side where the boat rested. Soon enough she appeared in my view, calm and detached. "Look at you. Old, sad and grey. We find ourselves back where it all began, down here at the rim of the sea, ready in this stone boat for an upcoming sacrifice." I coughed and shook my head with resolve. My people and I have sacrificed enough. There will be no more sacrifices. "Is that so? Then why are you holding this sacrificial dagger?" At first I was puzzled. Then I lowered my eye to my left hand. Indeed, I was clutching a long, curving and vicious-looking blade of unknown dark metal. Its handle was studded with dull, tiny gems, and its blade smeared with stains of what I hoped to be rust. Of course it was in truth dried blood. For each instrument of death, there is a receiver of death. Each dagger has its lamb. You had already prepared yours. Only now, through the murmur of the sea, I perceived muffled sobs somewhere near the boat where I couldn't see. So I turned my entire body to aim my healthy eye at it, and exhaled in sorrow. There was a small girl, perhaps 10 years of age, bound, gagged and blindfolded, struggling and squirming, all in vain. The ropes holding her were too tight and too thick for her to break free. Her wrists and ankles were clutched by knots of such complexity I had no hope of untying them. Following on impulse, I shot my hand out to cut her bindings. "No, Mordu, that is against my rules." Nuubat raised her finger. I felt my muscles weaken as I reached with the dagger. No matter how I wrinkled my forehead and strained, I couldn't move my blade any closer. "Look there," the goddess said, staring up the cliff tops. "You have an audience." I followed her gaze. Indeed, my people, the people of my city, were standing there watching us. They seemed to move, talk among each other, but from where I stood I couldn't distinguish their faces or what kind of expression they wore. Were they afraid? Or were they disgusted by me? Did they hate me? Perhaps they were all faceless, for they were no more than decorations arranged by Nuubat. So, I thought, my eye back on the girl. The final test was to exact what I had refused to do, pushing the weight of it onto the shoulders of my high priest instead. I was to take a life. But how could I? How could I take a child's life and remain a man and not become a despicable fiend? "This is your final test, Mordu," Nuubat asserted then. "Sacrifice this child. Take her life. Of course, you may always refuse. But then 15 people standing up there on the cliffs will slip. The wind will push them forth, and they will tumble to their deaths upon these shores." I lifted my head up. I took a good look, as much as my single eye allowed, at the people, then turned back to the girl. Once again I caught myself hesitating. Which weighed more, an innocent budding life or 15 other lives? For a while I stood still, listening to the crash of the waves, smelling the salt and turning the dagger this way and that. This time there was no correct answer to the riddle of Nuubat. Regardless of my choice, she would triumph and see me despised and turned into a monster. No matter which way the dagger went, I would be doomed to spend the rest of my nights plagued by nightmares of murder. Sacrifice a life, Mordu. A life is the price for your final deliverance. Or refuse and be redeemed by the wind and these sharp reefs. I nodded. I licked my dry lips and gripped the dagger with all the strength I still had. "I won't refuse," I said. "If it's a life you crave, then so be it. So be it. Here's your sacrifice." I arched the blade high. Nuubat watched. Her countenance remained cold and expectant. The girl doubtless heard us well. She redoubled her efforts, coiling like a snake in that damned stone boat. I brought the dagger down in a cruel swing. But instead of pushing it into the child's chest, I changed my grip halfway and thrust it into my own heart. Here, I thought triumphantly, is the sacrifice of life Nuubat so desires. This is where the deliverance of my people was sealed away, in my heart. "No!" The scream belonged to me. As triumphant as I was, the moment the tip of the blade tore my garments and drew a drop of blood from my skin, the dagger turned to dust. It crumbled and sagged, slipping through my clutching fingers. The wind picked it up and carried it over the sea like a misty veil. "Fascinating," Nuubat uttered, motionless at the side of the boat. "You were determined to do it, Mordu." She pointed at my tunic. There was a dark stain spreading where the skin was pierced. The goddess continued. "This was the only true answer. You have passed my test." It was an apocalypse. Cliffs sank into the boiling sea, spitting boulders as they went. Great vortices stretched from the brooding sky to the surface of the water, sucking it up. Beasts of legend arose from the depths to witness the last day of the solid land. Nuubat and I were flying over the scene of the calamity, rising higher and higher to the lights into the void of the universe. I saw roaming stars and burning disks and spheres of ice and vapor. There were worlds that crawled and worlds that sang. For as long as our journey lasted, I forgot all about my pain and suffering. I marveled at the forbidden sights a man was never allowed to witness. It was terrible, and it was glorious. At times I felt as though we had been flying for decades. At other times I believed we had just departed the crumbling world. Then Nuubat's body began its transformation to its true form. The form was equally terrifying and august, like the endless expanse of the universe around us. When it seemed that my senses were about to overwhelm my mind, all halted. I was suspended in the middle of the primal void, surrounded by Nuubat. Her voice, commanding, crushing, overpowering, thundered inside me. "Witness my collection." I strained my eye, and shapes appeared from nothingness. They were countless, stretching from the beginning of the world to its end, frozen in time and space. The most vicious of mortal criminals, so repulsive and evil that one look at him poisoned one's mind. The beast of beasts from another plane of existence, an apex predator whom even gods couldn't slay. The father of all gems, so perfect and wonderful I cried at its sight. The rarest of flowers, still blossoming through eons, the only one in its kind in all dimensions. I watched and watched, and I couldn't tear my gaze away from this collection, so horrible yet so magnificent. Involuntarily I sighed in disappointment when it faded back into the blackness and Nuubat filled its place. "The contract is struck, Mordu, the Lugu of Kosh-Nuubat. Your city will be prosperous, its granaries plentiful, its herds and fields fertile. Seas will be gentle when your fishermen cast their nets, and your craftsmen will find their work rivaling the legendary city of Kamum in its skill. There will be no more sacrifices required. I have no need of them anymore, for I, Nuubat the Collector, am claiming your soul. I will wait with patience for your last day on your mortal plane. After that, your soul will take its place in my collection, eternally on display for cosmic beings, Mordu, the most selfless of mortal rulers. So shall it be." There appeared a droning noise, quickly growing in power. I shut my eye and grasped my head with my hand. I screamed into the void, but no sound escaped my throat. I sat up in my bed in the familiar chambers of my palace. Was it all a dream? A single touch defied my budding hope. I felt the empty socket of my right eye. Then I glanced at the ugly stump of my right hand. It was night, and the chambers were quiet and pleasant. I heard a gentle knock on my door. "Come in." My vizier came through, with a concerned look on his face, carrying a wick lamp. "My lord," he bowed. "You were screaming in your slumber. I hope you're not ill." I squinted at the figure of the vizier cloaked in shadows. He seemed to have no questions about my missing limb and eye. Had Nuubat altered his memory? "I just saw a nightmare, that is all. Please help me to the upper terrace." "At this time of the night, my lord?" "I wish to breathe some fresh air." "As you desire." He helped me put on my clothes and followed me up the stairs to the terrace. The night was warm and the stars were bright and plentiful on the dome of the world. The city was asleep. I took a long stare at the walls. There was no sign of any enemy force, or any struggle or fight at all. The blue temple stood where I remembered it, only now it appeared washed in white. "How strange," I said out loud. "What is, my lord?" I pointed at the temple. "The blue temple seems to be white now." "Blue temple?" I noticed a hint of confusion in the voice of my vizier. He narrowed his eyes in the wrong direction and looked over the roofs thoughtfully. I suddenly had a simple idea. "Tell me," I began, "what is our city called?" The vizier looked at me with unconcealed alarm. "Kosh-Nuubat," he finally replied slowly and with caution. "My lord, should I perhaps send for a physician? Are you certain you're in good health?" So my soul was now forfeit. Nuubat was waiting for me. But I couldn't help but rejoice at the thought of how many lives I had saved at such a petty price as my own soul. The one last sacrifice. "Quite," I nodded. "I feel well. Help me back to my chambers." Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed the story. Consider subscribing to my channel. You can also find the text version of the story on my Substack. The link is in the description. Until next time.